Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Andrew Lewer. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the European Conservatives and Reformists group. And as the ECR coordinator for culture and education, and as a father, I'm very interested in the subject of freedom of education. I'm sorry I can't be there today with you to join the debate, and I therefore ask you to receive this virtual contribution to your event instead. The first school a child attends represents one of the fundamental pillars in shaping who they become as an adult in more ways than one. However, as you know, most students from the EU attend schools that are in the proximity of their parents' home, and children from poorer regions are therefore often trapped in low-performance schools. With bureaucracy and special interests governing those schools, the needs and preferences of students and parents are often neglected. If schools were free to compete to attract students from all backgrounds, enjoying the profit of their successes, but also being fully responsible for their failures, the pace of innovation would visibly increase and the exchange of best practices would flourish. It's a proven fact that innovation on the private business market thrives from profit and loss systems, so why shouldn't it be the same for the education sector? Educators may also find that freely competing for their positions on the labour market will lead them to better compensation and to more professional freedom. Clearly, limits to freedom in education will need to be discussed in your conference. There are a range of cultural issues there that I think are very important and particularly at the moment in Europe need to not be overlooked. And obviously there is a huge range of education provision in the independent sector across Europe, from some places in Eastern Europe that have little or almost no independent sector, right through to countries like Denmark and Holland that have this vast and exciting range and freedoms that I think we can all learn a lot from. And then we can reflect about places like the United Kingdom, where there is indeed a flourishing education sector that is independent, but it's restricted by income, which obviously brings its own shortcomings as well. So many EU politicians like to talk about European values, but to me, when speaking about education, that can only mean that parents and students hold a legitimate diversity of views regarding what schools should teach and how they should teach it. And this diversity ought to be reflected in the schooling system. When the government dictates the curriculum and the values to be instilled in these young minds, this pool of different views can be disregarded, and that can indeed lead to social conflict. In my view, a parent should be able to choose a school that reflects his or her family values and preferences. As Milton Friedman famously said, a society that puts equality before income will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. I believe that that insight is just as valuable when it comes to education policy as it is in economics. One of the things I feel quite strongly about in this respect is that in fact the independent sector is good for the state sector in education as well. It provides a benchmark. Two schools that come to mind that have closed and therefore the benchmark has been lost in areas I know about are St Elphin's School in the Derbyshire Dales and St Bees School up in the Lake District. Now there are excellent state schools in that area. I went to one myself that was founded back in 1585 and is a very traditional school with some very good results. But it did benefit from having independent schools in the proximity that could aspire to set the same standards and compete and therefore keep everybody at a good level. So I think it's important to underline at your conference that independent education is not only of benefit to those who are actually in it, but it's of benefit to pupils in other educational sectors as well. In the Entrepreneurship Education at School in Europe report that the European Commission has just published last month, employability is cited as a common goal across all educational strategies. If employability is the goal, then we should encourage investment in education from the private market, where today's students will compete for tomorrow's jobs. And we should welcome different approaches to education to create a more diverse pool of human resources. There are those opposed to this. There are those who say that employability simply leads to work robots. I think that's an unfounded concern, and I think it's usually based in the self-indulgence of special interests, because we all know that the modern economy requires soft skills, it requires creative minds, but it also requires disciplined individuals. Two anecdotes to close on. I'm a governor of the University of Derby, and the freedoms and flexibilities that have come to the university sector in the UK over the last 6 years in particular have enabled us to innovate and improve the offer that we have for students to a huge degree, and our new Institute of Engineering Excellence is a particular case in point. And also a much smaller anecdote, but I think one that's illustrative of the importance of people having a stake in education and feeling that they own it and can control it. When I was the leader of Derbyshire County Council before I became an MEP, we used to have a range of arts events at a literature festival, and we used to levy a small charge for the tickets for people to attend those events, just £2 or £3 usually, all except in one area of the county, which was a particularly deprived area where we took the view to have no charge at all. That proved to be a mistake, and it was illustrated in a very, very simple way. When it rained, the attendance at events where people had paid just a few pounds to attend was as high as it would ever be. People still attended because they had a stake in it, they'd invested in it. When the event was free and it rained, we had terrible attendances and problems. It's a small anecdote, but I hope it illustrates this wider point about the value for everybody in Europe of a thriving independent educational sector. Thanks very much.